Who can take a flower, roll it up and make it fine? Sprinkle it with knowledge and a little bit of time. Cover it with headlines and a sweet euphoria too. Cannabis man, cannabis man, cannabis man. Spreading news and joy across the land. Diving deep into the growing green. Cannabis man, we're all king.
Hello there, and welcome into another episode of the Cannabis Man podcast. Thank you so much for clicking on the show. I am your host, Don Kleppen, and I created this show a few years back because I wanted to bring conversations and information to people maybe in newly legal territories or where in places it's going to be legal in the future. I wanted to bring some answers to questions and some real insight into this plant that humans have been using for thousands of years, yet it's been strictly prohibited around much of the world for almost the last century. If it's your first time listening, I say regularly on this show that I'm not here believing that cannabis is right for everybody. I know plenty of people who are intelligent, who I respect, who have tried cannabis, and they say it's just not for them, and I believe them. And I don't think that it's right for everybody. But I do know that it's right for me, and I know that it's right for a lot of people out there. And my problem is that we live in this society where more harmful substances, like alcohol, like cigarettes, sugars, like addictive opiates, are legal and sometimes prescribed. And in the case of alcohol, basically shoved down our throats through commercials and advertisements and all kinds of stuff. And yet we know those to be quite harmful. But those substances are normalized and get a free pass in our society when cannabis, and those of us that use it, are still looked down upon, are still dealing with the lingering stigma from last century. I'm talking about the reefer madness propaganda. And so I guess another purpose for this show is that I wanted to share information, perspective, context, and conversations with experts. People who are doing research in labs like scientists, doctors who are prescribing this medically to their patients and what they are seeing right now today. Entrepreneurs who are making products or services in these legal spaces. Politicians whose responsibility it is to create and enforce new laws in legal cannabis spaces. And journalists or others who are covering this, sharing the newest and latest information that we're finding out across this green frontier. So that is what I aim to provide here on the Cannabis Man podcast. I've been doing the show for a couple of years, and in that time, this show has grown to one of the top podcasts around the world. It was listed the number 1 indie news podcast by Good Pods, along with the top 5 cannabis podcast. This show has reached listeners in 87 countries and is now listed in the top 5% of popular podcasts around the globe, of which there are well over 5 million. And so that significance is not lost on me. There are many, many podcasts out there, and I really appreciate you tuning into this one. However, whenever, and wherever you might be listening to this, thank you. If you would be so kind, leave a rating or review for this podcast on whichever platform you're listening. If this is through Apple or Spotify or YouTube, wherever you're getting my voice right now, there's a function there to rate the show, to review it, to subscribe, to leave a comment. Any and all of that is welcome and appreciated. Whatever you think the show is worth, just leave a review, because that helps this stand out from the millions of other podcasts out there. And it'll put it in front of more people. And then more and more people hopefully will be able to get this important information as I see it. And so on these episodes, in addition to kind of sharing those news headlines, that context and information, as I said, I always like to speak with guest experts. And my guest today is an entrepreneur. She is in the cannabis space. She is running a company in Michigan. You can find out about some of their products. I've got one right here that I'm excited to tell you about. And even if you're not in Michigan, they have some CBD products that you can order across the country, and we'll get to that a little bit as well. But she is somebody that came into cannabis later in her life, but she was dealing with a medical issue for much of her teenage years. And she found cannabis to be incredibly helpful for her in order to sort of lead a more normal life and existence. And she tells us about her story as well as the story of her company. We talk about things like rescheduling, hemp versus cannabis, and industries like big pharma getting into the cannabis space. So that conversation is here for you. I've got a few products to tell you about. Of course, the High Haiku at the very end here, and a little bit of a topic that I thought was important this week, the first week of April, always kind of bringing this sort of issue to mind. I'm going to talk about a sort of holiday, I suppose, that always kicks off the month of April, but I feel like this holiday has maybe overstayed its welcome. So all of that is coming to you and more on this episode of the Cannabis Man Podcast. Here we go.
This is Tommy Chong, and you're listening to the Cannabis Broadcast.
Alrighty, now we're into the show properly, and I want to start this episode off talking about that holiday that I was referencing in the open, and that would be April Fool's Day. That was yesterday from when I'm recording this, April 1st, every year in the U.S. I don't know if it's this way worldwide, and let me know if I'm off base here. You can text the show anytime by scrolling down in those description notes and clicking on the Text Cannabis Man link. You can send a message that way and I'll get it. So let me know if April Fools is a big thing elsewhere in the world, but it's certainly the case here in America. Is this holiday where pranks and fake news headlines and articles and stuff like that make their way around the internet and into people's lives, and it's always been kind of good fun. You know, I feel like people have looked at it in the vein of Halloween, where you're dressing up and you're playing in costume, and it gives you a chance to be somebody else at a different point of the year, at that point in October where it's very spiritual and spooky and the harvest moon and all that. And believe me, I love Halloween. And there were days, April Fool's days when I was younger, that I enjoyed that too. I liked the fun that could be had pranking people, especially in school. You know, there's a lot more opportunity there. You're in front of a lot more people. You've got friends that you can enjoy those pranks with. I get the appeal. But I bring this up right now because in 2025, in this era of fake news, in this era of hyperpolarization, not just politically, but with everything, it seems like so many topics get boiled down to option A or option B. And the whole debate becomes like a team sport match, and everybody declares a side, and then that tribalism just takes over. It's us versus them. And so I guess my thinking on this has changed. My feelings on April Fools have kind of evolved a little bit, and I personally just feel like this holiday is no longer just all in good fun. Something has kind of turned rotten in what was, I think for a long time, just a harmless opportunity to play some pranks or some jokes on your friends, or maybe, early on in the internet, some of these fake headlines might have been funny. But now, in 2025, I truly believe that there is just so much misinformation out there, and that people are struggling to find out what's true and get factual accuracy on a whole host of issues on a day-to-day basis, that the formerly harmless and good-natured pranking spirit of April Fools now is feeling a little bit more ugly, is feeling a little bit more problematic. And believe me, I'm not somebody that gets offended easily. I'm somebody that generally can get a good laugh at some fake headlines and a good prank. I think if a joke is well done, it's always welcome. But a lot of these modern day April Fool's pranks amount to somebody creating what at one point might have seemed like an outlandish news story and sharing that headline on social media and everything, and then it might gain traction. But like I said, today's climate, today's information environment is so fraught with fake news and sort of wrong headlines and information as it stands, that having this day where ridiculous headlines are abounding and people are kind of sharing like, oh, hey, that celebrity died. Can you believe it? Or, oh, wow, the river in Chicago is now filled with Frank's hot sauce. They're dyeing it red instead of green and all of that. There are some fun ones still. There's still fun to be had. But I'm more of the opinion that this holiday should be retired, man. This thing should be shelved, because I just think that now reality is so stressed out about sussing out the truth, and it can be hard enough on a daily basis to spot the fake news because we're all inundated with so much information every day that it's hard to keep straight what's real and what's not. And so this day where, for a long time, it was just harmless to share some ridiculous headline. Nowadays, it just doesn't feel like that is so harmless. And it feels to me like people's ability to recognize an obviously fake headline or sort of a prank news story, I feel like that's actually diminished. Maybe because of the deluge of information we get hit with every day. Maybe because so much of it, depending on which publication you're reading these things from, stuff is editorialized and kind of tweaked in how it's presented to you so much all the time. Maybe because reality has just gotten so ridiculous, I guess, that to me, what someone views as an obvious prank headline, somebody else may not view it that way. Maybe this is just the environment of hyper offense, increased sensitivity that we all find ourselves in. I don't want to, put it on the Me Too movement. I'm not saying it's post Me Too, but I do feel like that there is increased sensitivity out there. And there is also, which I think is a good instinct, the effort to be more inclusive. I think that idea, the intent of that, is a good one. But like a lot of things, good intent may not be actually enough to really do the thing that you're trying to do. That cliche of the road to hell is paved with good intentions, that's a cliche for a reason, like a lot of cliches. And maybe you stopped listening to it a while ago because you heard it repeated ad nauseum. That does not take away the truth of the statement. And the fact is, the good intentions of what you view as a well-crafted April Fool's Day prank or joke or fake headline may end up sending people spinning off the rails. And I guess, maybe I'm alone in this. And like I said, please send a text. Let me know what you think. But I personally just feel like April Fool's Day, in the age of misinformation that we find ourselves in, I feel like April Fool's Day has kind of run its course and maybe overstayed its welcome a little bit. And I think that there are better holidays that we could maybe use April 1st for. So anyway, that's my soapbox on April Fool's Day. Like I said, want to hear your opinion about that. If you think that the holiday still has merit, if you're a fan of April Fools, or if you're not, I would love to hear either way. Send a text to Cannabisman at the link below. But another problem with April Fools, whether you're a fan of it or not, one of the issues with it is that it can be hard to market something. It can be hard to kind of let people know about a new business or a new product or a service or even a movie or, a musician if you got a new album out or anything. If you've got something exciting to let people know about, you got to steer clear of April 1st because who's going to know that you're legitimate or not in whatever you're trying to draw attention to? Case in point, there is something coming to the city of Chicago that I've been kind of excited about because it's only the third location in the world that this is being offered at. I don't know if you're into Harry Potter, listener, but I am admitting to the fact that I very much am right now. I grew up reading those books. I was born in 1987, last century, when I feel like making myself feel older. That's what I'll say. I was born before the turn of the century, back in 1987. So I read Harry Potter in the 90s. I grew up in the 90s. I was lucky to see some things like the Chicago Bulls legendary dynasty run. I've got memories when I was young of watching Michael Jordan play. A lot of great stuff from the 90s that I remember. But that was also when the Harry Potter books were coming out live. And I remember in elementary school, I was introduced to them. I can't remember how, but I resisted it for a long time because it was already popular in 4th or 5th grade by the time that I'd heard about it. There were other students in my school who were just obsessed with the story. And so I resisted it. And actually, now that I'm telling this, I do remember how I was introduced. My brother, Dan, who's a year and a half younger than me, he came home one day and his teacher, one of them, had assigned him the first Harry Potter book, The Sorcerer's Stone or The Philosopher's Stone, depending on where you're listening to this from. That first book was assigned reading for him. And my brother Dan, not a big reader, so he pretty much just tossed that book aside when he brought it home, leaving it open for me to take a gander at. And I remember after dinner one night, I went up there and I was like, all right, let's see what all this hubbub is about. Let me see what all the girls in my class are talking about here. And I opened the cover and I read the first chapter, and then the second, and then the third. And like 2 hours later, I was done with the book. And then over the next week or two, I read the number 2 and 3. And then it was just lucky at that time, the 4th book had just come out and my mom bought it for me. So I burned through that. And then a few years later, I remember my family and I were at the Wisconsin Dells. If you've ever been there, listener, big water parks, big, family fun. And my grandma has some timeshare there. And I got some of the worst sunburn I've ever had in my life. I was literally purple. I'm sure that there's going to come a day that I'll go see a dermatologist and he's like, oh, yeah, you're dying. And that's because of that one time that you got that badly sunburned in the Wisconsin Dells. I must have been like 14 or 15. I could actually time it out if I had bothered to do the calculations before I brought this topic up, so forgive me. But either way, when the 6th book came out, it was that weekend when I was in the Dells and I was so sunburnt that I could not sleep. There was no position that was comfortable enough for me to linger in to sleep on. I would fall asleep one way and then I'd wake up 15 minutes later because some part of me moved, and that was agony, so that it pulled me from my slumber. And after a while, anyway, my grandma went to Walmart nearby for the midnight release of the 6th Harry Potter book. And so I stayed up all night reading the book. And it's one of my fondest memories because, it sucked not being able to go to sleep. I was going to be up all night anyway. But instead, it turned into one of the great all-nighters. And at breakfast the next morning, I was in tears because of something in the plot that happens. I am bringing all this up to you because there is a Harry Potter store that's opening in Chicago, April 10th. It's only the 3rd location in the world. There's one in London, of course, and then New York City. Now, Chicago on Michigan Avenue is going to have one of these Harry Potter stores. It's got a butterbeer bar with all these different, flavors that you can try of that. They're going to sell the Birdie Bots, every flavor beans, wands and robes, and all the different stuff of that world. You can go to this place and you can shop. Do the American thing. Whip out the wallet and buy some product. But stepping into that store, if you're into Harry Potter, it's just going to be like if you can't afford to go to the Harry Potter world down in Orlando, Florida, you can go to Michigan Avenue and, run around the store with your kids and just take a little bit of a break from reality and step into that manufactured world. Well, the Harry Potter store in Chicago tried to do a marketing effort yesterday by rolling out some giant Birdie Bott's Every Flavor beans, if you're familiar. They're basically jelly beans. They floated a bunch of those in the Chicago River. And I went down there with my wife Gretchen and my daughter Violet. We all went down yesterday morning to have some fun in the downtown area. Took some pictures, put on robes, had the wands out, tried to guess some of the flavors of jelly beans, which we were successful at. Now we have several boxes of those floating around the house, which I don't know if you've tried those, but they really do have like vomit flavor and all kinds of stuff. So it's weird, to say the least. You get a handful of jelly beans, and a lot of them are fruity and good, and then all of a sudden you get this like really acidic vomit flavor. It's just insane, but I continue to subject myself to those anyway. The reason I bring this up is because there was like nobody else there. And it wasn't just because it was cold. I think it was because they did this marketing effort on April 1st. And I think a lot of the people who likely saw the pictures and the headlines about it on social media yesterday probably thought it was an April Fool's joke. And so, I mean, I'm not complaining. Me and my family had a great time down there. And there was no crowds, there was no line to have to wait in order to get up to that and take these pictures and do this thing. But it's an example of some of the difficulty that anybody trying to market anything on April Fool's Day can run up against. So anyway, that's kind of the point that I'm bringing up here. In addition to the misinformation, I feel like April Fool's Day can make it a real troubling thing to try and market something new. But speaking of something new, I don't know if those jelly beans appealed to you or not, but maybe cookies do. Are you a fan of cookies? I certainly am. I love a good cookie. Chocolate chip, butterscotch, salted caramel, snickerdoodle, sugar cookies. Whatever your preference is. I mean, what's better than a good cookie? If you're interested in trying some delicious cookies that are freshly made and ready for you to pick up at any time, I want to announce right now on this podcast that there is a new company in the Chicago area launched by my very own wife, Gretchen, whom I am very proud of for doing this. She has launched the Lion Legacy Cookie Company. Lion is spelled Lyon. It's a family name. It's my mom's family's name, and now Gretchen, being part of the family, is in that as well. Our daughter Violet, her middle name is Lion, and my grandma, my mom's mom, who we lost last year, her married name is Lion. And that's where Lion Legacy comes from. But Gretchen has always been very gifted in the kitchen. She loves baking, has always wanted to do something with baking. And so the more time last year we had at home, she started experimenting with recipes and has decided to make a go of this. And so she's launched her business, and you can find those pages on Facebook and Instagram by just searching for Lion Legacy Cookie Company. Lyon, Legacy Cookie Company. Soon you'll be able to place orders. If you're near the Edgewater neighborhood of Chicago, you can pick them up. And there is more to come on this front. But I just wanted to give a shout out to my wonderful wife, Gretchen, for taking a swing on this and starting a business with something that she absolutely loves doing. And let me tell you, listener, I'm not just saying this as, a supportive husband. I'm saying this as a cookie lover. The cookies that she has come up with to start this thing are second to none. It's really a problem around our house because we have cookies around all the time now, and my waistline is expanding at a disturbing rate. So do me a favor. Check out Lion Legacy Cookie Company and take some of this inventory off of our hands because I can't stop myself from eating them when they're around here. They are so delicious. She's found ways to play with the texture and taste, and she has different recipes that you haven't tried before. It's very exciting. So anyway, next time you're in Chicago and in the mood for cookies, remember Lion Legacy. But it's not just cookies that I'm here to talk to you about today. If this is your first time listening to the show, I also like to highlight cannabis products that I've been trying throughout the week. And this product is actually just out today. This is a brand new offering from a company I've spoken with twice on the show because I love what they're doing so much. These are the fine folks at WYNK, WYNK. And WYNK makes THC-infused seltzers. There are the WYNK products, which are 2 to 5 milligrams. If you have an 8-ounce can, it's 2. If you have a 12-ounce can, there's 5 milligrams in there. They've also made the Countdown beverages. You can find those at dispensaries. I've reviewed both of those on the show. So if you want to hear more about them, check out those episodes. Countdown is THC and caffeine. So it's kind of like an infused energy drink, and you can find those 10 milligram drinks at dispensaries. But the WYNKs sold at liquor stores and bars, and even convenience stores. I've seen WYNKs everywhere. Maybe you have too, even at Binny's around Chicago. But WYNK now, as of today, April 2nd, 2025, WYNK is offering 3 new flavors in 10 milligram cans. No caffeine, just 10 milligrams in a good old seltzer. And these flavors are lemonade, raspberry lemonade, and strawberry lemonade. So 3 variations of lemonade just in time for summer. I know we just got into spring. It's April here, but summer's coming. Always looking ahead to that. And I've tried these now, all 3 flavors of these WYNKs. Actually, I've only tried 2. The third one I'm holding here in my hand, which is the strawberry lemonade. I'm going to try this live right now with you. But the lemonade and the raspberry lemonade, very citrusy, very delicious and refreshing. And exactly the kind of thing, as I was drinking them, it's exactly the kind of thing that I look forward to going to, like a barbecue or a block party in the summertime and somebody popping a cooler and you pull out one of these cans with the moisture running down the side on a hot day. It's actually a little heated here in the booth, so I've got some condensation on this can that I pulled out of the fridge, and I'm going to try right now because I just can't stand looking at these droplets that are really, tempting me. So here is the WYNK Strawberry Lemonade. Cheers to you. Oh, man. Ooh, that is good. Okay, so right off the bat, there is the citrus lemony bit, but this one has that sweet of strawberry that doesn't just fade in on the back end, but kind of meets you in the front. What I noticed about the base lemonade was you really get that sour tartness on the sides of your tongue from the first drink, and it kind of stays there. This one, the strawberry is there along for the ride the entire time. And it's pleasant. The thing that WYNK does very well is that I feel like none of their flavors come on too strong or stay around too long. The aftertastes of these fade nicely, and this one is just about gone now from that first drink I just took. It's basically like I taste nothing now because it's just a base seltzer. And I find that really nice with a seltzer. You know, part of my problem with like sodas and teas a lot of the time is that those aftertastes can linger far too long. And I think WYNK does a great job of allowing their flavors to come on decently, but then fade away without, overstaying their welcome. And that is definitely the case with this strawberry lemonade. I think the lemonade is my favorite, though. This strawberry lemonade's number 2. The raspberry is not bad. It just, to me, it tasted a lot like the normal lemonade flavor, which I think is their strongest. Of these 3 new offerings, that is. I love the base flavors of WYNK. Big fan of black cherry. I've talked about that on the show. I've talked about their cran blood orange last Halloween season. They have made some really great flavors. And these various lemonades that they have now, again, out today, I think you should find these for yourself and try them out this weekend. I don't know where you are, but here around Chicago, it was kind of a gloomy few days. It's a little colder now than we'd prefer it. It went up to about 70 last week. Now we're sitting around the 40s with like some rain-snow mix happening and some heavy winds, but it will be warm again eventually. And these lemonades from WYNK are exactly the kind of thing that you want to have to just really take the edge off, to refresh yourself. And as I talk about with pretty much all the cannabis seltzers that I try, what's so magical about these is they refresh you, they take you to a slightly altered state, they take that edge off, and there's no hangover. There is no cost to this party to be paid the next day. So the next time you're looking for a cannabis beverage to try, do yourself a favor and look for the new lemonades 10 milligram offerings from WYNK seltzers. You'll be glad you did. And now for my conversation with this week's guest expert. Really enjoyed this. Let me know what you think by texting the show after you listen to the interview. But after we're done, I've got another product to tell you about, as well as some news headlines and the High Haiku. But for now, enjoy this week's guest interview. Listener, welcome back. My guest today has a very interesting story to share, and I'm very happy to have this conversation and to bring it to you. She is a 28-year-old entrepreneur, and she's a social equity champion along with a disability rights activist. And she started a company in the cannabis space based on her own life experiences and trying to promote the health and wellness benefits of cannabis. You know, if you've listened to this show at all before, you know that that's very, very close to my own mission here with Cannabis Man, where we're just trying to destigmatize, inform, and really just share the information about the potential quality of life improvements that cannabis can offer. We have all been inundated with the stigma of the last almost century now. Sitting here in 2025, it's been about 90 years since cannabis was first, officially prohibited here. And that brainwashing, those negative connotations that have been baked into the country for so long, it's very hard for any of us to still try and fight against that. And so the work that people are doing in the space to not only just create businesses and brands, but also be fighting against that uphill battle of people's expectations and the, 80 years of this information that falsely led people to believe that cannabis is nothing but some evil plant. It's a tough one, and I appreciate anybody else who is in that fight, which includes my guest today, the Chief Development Officer of Exclusive Brands, Narmin Jarrous. Welcome, Narmin. Thanks for joining us today.
Thanks for having me, Don. I'm so excited.
It's great to have you here. And so let's just talk a little about your journey. How did you, come up, and then what got you into cannabis in the first place?
So my journey is a long and complicated one. I grew up in Michigan. I've been in Michigan my whole life. And I grew up in a very kind of conservative, traditional Catholic Arab household. And so I kind of had a bit of a sheltered upbringing, one could say. But I was always really interested in medicine and science. I grew up, loving just the entire scientific world. I thought I wanted to be a doctor for a very long time. And I went to school and ended up majoring in behavioral and biological sciences just because I was so interested in the scientific world. While I was doing that, I was actually working for a restaurant management company. We were working on different franchises as well as getting some restaurants in the Detroit Metropolitan Airport. So I was working in the business world, but I wasn't really sure what I wanted to do because I was really much more interested in science. Fast forward a couple of years, my team decides that we are going to delve into the world of medical cannabis. I did not know much about it. I knew about the regulatory framework because I had just gotten interested in highly regulated industries. Working with the airport is kind of very similar to working with the state regulatory agencies, if you can believe it, just because it's so many regulations, it's all red tape, it's all, bureaucracy. It's kind of the same thing in a different flavor. And so we kind of jumped into this medical cannabis world. I taught myself, everything that there is to know that is widely available about cannabis, medicinal and otherwise. And I just really wanted to make sure that if I was going to dive into this world, I was going to do it justice and I was going to do some justice. And so we really dove in with a very social justice framework in mind. We really wanted to make sure that our impact would be a positive one. And we really took seriously how heavy it was, all the history that comes along with cannabis and with running a cannabis business. Because you do feel a lot of guilt around, hey, I'm operating this business, which is, just a legal business like any other, for the most part, but there's people in prison for possession, for sales, for whatever it is, but for cannabis-related offenses. And that's in the year of our Lord 2025. And it's just ludicrous. And so when we embarked on this journey, it's 7-8 years ago now, we just wanted to make sure that everywhere we went, we did good, and we were doing justice for all those that kind of came before us. Now, the harder part of that is not only do we have that kind of heavy burden emotionally, but we're kind of treated like criminals. Illegally operating businesses are now kind of treated like criminals in their states because they're cannabis related.
Right.
Now, we're kind of used to that because we've always been treated that way from the beginning. They wouldn't let us bank normally. They would punish our employees for being employees of ours. They would shut down their bank accounts. There would be a lot of problems with our employees trying to get benefits, trying to get home loans, things like that we had to work through and aid our employees, because so many people are so passionate about working in this industry and they're then penalized for it. And it's just this absurd scenario that we're really trying to work against. And so when creating Exclusive, we wanted to make sure it was a safe and healthy place for our employees to work, and we produce safe and healthy products. And I think we've done that. We've kind of been the leaders in compliance, in regulatory work, and in our social equity efforts in Michigan, as we work really closely with the state to kind of support all of their social equity endeavors.
You talk about Exclusive Brands, Michigan's leading vertically integrated cannabis company, and you've got a retail presence in multiple spots. And the flagship, I believe, is in Ann Arbor, which is a fantastic college town. I absolutely love it. Tell us a little about how, you started with Exclusive and sort of, what you guys think about in terms of retail brands and things that you want to bring under your umbrella, so to speak.
Yeah, so when we started with Exclusive, we really had a retail mind forward because of our history with restaurants and airport concessions and things like that. We knew the customer service aspect of it. We really had that down, in our opinion. So we knew our strong suits, and so being vertically integrated, we had the privilege to be able to produce products that we were based on our own standards, which are really high, and sell those in our retail stores. But we really wanted to make sure that we had something for everyone. We're really inclusivity forward. We want to make sure that anyone that comes into one of our retail stores has a product for them. And so we didn't want to be those people that only sold the products we made. And so we also really wanted to foster a very healthy market in Michigan. And, while competition is important, we wanted to also, uplift a lot of the brands around us. And so we would highlight different brands with a focus on smaller brands, mom and pop shops, that sort of thing, and make sure that they had the opportunity to have a presence in our stores. And I think with that, we helped foster kind of a healthier marketplace. And we wanted to, we have a very diverse customer base. And so it's kind of ludicrous to think if we sold one vape brand and one gummy brand that we produced, that it would satisfy everybody that came into our store.
Right.
And especially because so many people have so many different needs. That's why we need so many different types of consumption ways. That's why some people can only use topicals. Some people can only have edibles. Some people can't have edibles because they have diabetes. So if they have, if it's edibles, it needs to be sugar-free or yada yada. So there's so much that goes into cultivating a good customer experience, from the quality of the brands we sell to the quality of the brands that we produce. And so I think that just putting our customer experience first really kind of set us apart. We also were the first to be licensed in the state recreationally.
Wow.
So we were the first legal dispensary, grow, and manufacturing facility in the state. I always tell people I'm very annoying. I'm very annoyingly persistent. And so we actually submitted our application 17 minutes after it opened, the night it opened. So we
Wow.
submitted at 12:17 because I wasn't going to be able to go to sleep that night until it was submitted and off my plate.
Yeah.
And so we were the first to get licensed. It was very exciting, going rec, and we had lines around the building for weeks and weeks. It was a very exciting time. It's kind of like the nostalgic days now. And since then, we've just tried to take a lot of our customer feedback, and, the market's changed so much that we've just kind of tried to pivot and go with the flow and adapt to the different market changes and the different consumer needs, and the changes that kind of happen and the trends that happen in that regard. And so I think we've been able to foster a really great, community. We kind of have this micro community in Ann Arbor, as well as all the other cities around the state where we're located. And so increasing the access to safe, tested, legal cannabis was really our goal. And I think we're well on our way, although, it's far from over.
Yes. Yeah. And great points in there too. I think clearly you're driven and motivated and very ahead of the game because, not to lean into the stereotypes, there are plenty of productive stoners out there, but I do think there are also a lot in the group that might procrastinate, might be a little bit, happy to just sort of like go with the flow. I'm right. More in that, camp. And I like the idea of you at 12-17, as soon as that line opens up, you're like, yo, I'm in this, and not being able to go to sleep that night, that really speaks to your character for sure.
Well, I'm also not a productive stoner, so if I was gonna smoke, I was gonna have to finish the application first. So
oh yeah,
there's also motivation there. I'm not that great. So.
I get what you mean. And like I said, it's different for everybody, and that kind of speaks to what you were saying about the different products you guys have, because that's a really important point too. I mentioned at the top, kind of this stigma, and it's so goofy that for people who are outside the space, especially, they look at cannabis and it's still kind of reduced to this one thing where you imagine somebody smoking, and then you have that stereotypical viewpoint from like the DARE education from last century, which still bothers me to say it that way, but it's historically accurate. But that's when like the DARE officers were coming to our school showing us videos of scrambled eggs and saying, this is what's going to happen and all that. And so you've got these people who imagine anyone who consumes cannabis to be a stoner who's slowly like sinking into their couch and not really capable of doing anything else. Right. And yet looking at, let's just say, alcohol, which is a comparison I make a lot on the show just simply for sort of the altered state, the places where people consume it and all that. Look at all the levels that alcohol has of like, are you a beer drinker, wine drinker? Do you like seltzers? Are you a hard liquor person? There are so many. And then even within those, there are sub-levels of like top shelf and bottom shelf. And there's so many subcategories. And people identify with those different groups. People argue about tequila, mezcal, or whiskey or whatever, and they identify like that. And yet this plant with hundreds of cannabinoids that's even more complex than alcohol is, we're still reducing it, or, those that think this way still reduce it to this one kind of thing. And so having products that are not just flower, but as you mentioned, things like topicals, things like edibles, these beverages, that space I know is, I've said it on the show a lot, I really feel like it is exploding and just primed to continue to do that. And other, even crazier stuff like suppositories and like, other creams and things. Meeting people where they are in order to really get the most benefits that they need from this plant, spun in a way that makes it best for them. Some people are the 20 milligram starters, others have a higher tolerance, whatever. But having offerings in all of those categories is super important, and it seems like at Exclusive you guys are doing that.
Well, we're trying really hard, and it's funny because I was kind of one of those consumers that started out very intimidated by the industry. I actually started working in cannabis before I'd ever smoked cannabis.
Wow.
Because I'd grown up really sheltered. I also, I have a disability, and so I was diagnosed at age 15 with endometriosis, and so I've dealt with chronic pain issues since I was really probably 11, as early as 11 years old, but I found out at 15 what was going on.
Yeah.
But after that, the only solution they had for me was prescription painkillers. They didn't have anything to treat it. They didn't have anything to prevent it. All they could provide me was prescription painkillers. So at 15, they were trying to prescribe me Vicodin. They were trying to prescribe me Oxy.
Jeez.
They wanted me taking Motrin every 8 hours. Don't skip a dose. You have to follow it up with Tylenol just to be able to function. I'd have to go to the ER once a month to get a morphine drip because I was not functional. It was bad.
Man.
And there was no solutions. They told me, take more pills. I said the pills don't work. They said take more, which they should not say to anyone, let alone a 15, 16, 17-year-old.
Exactly.
Like, I'm trying to figure out high school and boys,
Right.
and let alone OxyContin. So
Yeah.
it was a complicated time, to say the least. And, through all that, the team behind Exclusive that ran the restaurant management company really supported me, and I was able to, continue working despite my disability. I was like the first work from home person that ever existed because they would give me that flexibility. And through that, when I started using cannabis, we developed a line of products based around my own needs, because we would have I let people know, like, I can't smoke and work. And so I would need something different. If I was going to have to come to work and do all this legal work and talk to the state regulators, I couldn't do it high personally. Like, we know some people can so work high. I'm not that person.
Sure.
And so we developed this line of products that really has something for everyone, called Nino's Naturals. Nino is my nickname from when I was a kid. And we developed this line of products that it met me where I am. It fit and fixed all my needs. It met all my needs, and we have a full CBD, a 1-to-1, a 3-to-1, and a full THC category of each of our products. And that way we really fulfilled our mission statement of cannabis for everyone, and we had a product that fit everyone's needs. But also, I use many of the products in the line at various times in the day, just because whether it be a patch or a tincture or whatever it is, we have them in every kind of dose, and it really fits every kind of part of your day that you need. And so I was able to find a lot of pain relief, a lot of nausea relief, without being impaired at all. So I was able to finish my work. And then, when I was done with my work and I did kind of want to take a load off, relax, we had products for that too. And so through that, we addressed a lot of the kind of needs people had, and especially the people that were maybe too scared to try cannabis because of all the scary things they heard, because it's the devil's lettuce, and you're going to get addicted to who knows what based on that. All the things that we've all heard growing up. And so through this line, we were able to present people with a non-intimidating, really low dose to start product that you could kind of get your mom to try. You could kind of get your dad to try it. And so I was like, one of my proudest moments was when I finally got my parents to try CBD, because even that was a lot for them. Even that they consider, it's cannabis.
Right.
It's basically a drug. You might as well be doing heroin.
Yeah,
I know
yeah.
that's insane, but that's the thought process.
Totally.
And so when I got them to use CBD for the first time, I was like over the moon, like shouting from the rooftops.
Yes.
And now my parents will use like THC patches and stuff because it doesn't impair them, but it helps my mom's arthritis and it helps my dad's back pain. And these are my two uber Catholic Palestinian parents who are too scared to take Tylenol, and I have them taking tinctures now, and that's like my shining moment. And that's what I hope is happening with people all over the country, because there's so much relief to be found. And I just really try to emphasize to people, I was a different person 10 years ago. I was not functional. I couldn't travel. I mean, I was an adult who lived with their parents because they couldn't do their own laundry and function. I was in so much pain all the time. And meanwhile, we're working on this life-changing company that is able to provide so many different products to so many different people who are desperately in need of relief. And then we're still being demonized for it all over the country. And it's heartbreaking, because I know that while I can serve my Michigan community, and there's so many people I can't reach. There's so many other states that don't even want medical marijuana legalized, despite the fact that we know politicians use the products. We know they use worse.
Of course.
And yet people who are in pain are being used as like political cannon fodder.
Yeah.
And that's so disheartening, and it's painful, because I know that, when I'm in excruciating pain and I can't eat for days at a time, and the only thing that's helping me is cannabis, and you finally like feel that relief, it's just heartbreaking to think there's so many people who are so much worse off than me that can't have this because 2 billionaires want to use it as a political fight. Like, that's absurd.
Yeah.
It breaks my heart.
Yeah, Narmin, I mean, there's a lot there that you said that is frustrating that we're still dealing with, but, also really uplifting too, to tell your journey like that. Thanks for sharing that, because, there is a lot of toughness, and I have to say it resonates a lot with me because my mom is, Polish, Irish Catholic, but very much the same thing. There was no drugs. I mean, like cigarettes, sure, fine. But like aside from that, it was nothing, and not even alcohol or anything. And when I started this show, it was mainly with the intent of getting like her and like her sisters, my aunts, who are very conservative that way, who would never in a million years like think of trying this, but who could desperately use the help, like getting to sleep with like CBN or anything else. So getting her to try some CBN stuff and actually use it to go to sleep and everything, that is a high point still that I'll always have in the back of my head. And it's more satisfying than most of the other things, what else I've achieved like with this and just kind of helping it. But you bring up critical points as well, which is sort of to say that in these states in which we live, thankfully it is recreationally legal and we can kind of customize our lives and get free of the unpleasantness of the, just the burdens of living, whatever those might look like for different peoples. But we can use cannabis freely and just as a part of our lives like anything else to help. And yet there are states all around the country that still can't do that. And, you and I are recording this January 21st. We recently got the news that the rescheduling timeline got pushed back at least 3 months, could be longer than that, to see if it ever happens. But, rescheduling, I've talked about it a lot on the show. And I know it means different things to different people. Some business owners are excited about the 280E, the potential tax breaks that you can, write off on that. I also like the idea of a potential interstate marketplace where you wouldn't necessarily have to establish all of your production facilities within state lines, where you could actually get stuff you could collaborate with other companies existing in other states and kind of try it, in brands under your own umbrella and everything. But I want to return to some other things you said, but, on rescheduling, let me ask for you as a, business owner and as a business, somebody who's in this with a lot of different brands in your company, what would rescheduling mean to you? And are you hoping that we do get it sometime this year?
Rescheduling is, one of the most important conversations that are being had in the industry. I'm not holding my breath.
Yeah.
Is what I'll say. We've been promised a lot of things over the years, that politicians are taking this stuff seriously, from banking bills to legalization to decriminalization, and we really haven't seen anything that instills a ton of confidence. And as I am excited for the potential for it to benefit businesses, 280E, all of that jazz is amazing and impactful, especially for small businesses who don't have access to the same protections that other legal businesses do, despite operating legally and having more regulation than a regular business.
Yeah.
But I just haven't seen anything that instills that much confidence. And so I kind of have this mantra where I try to control what I can control, because otherwise I'll go crazy. I tend to have the weight of all the pain of the entire world on my shoulders, and I'm one of those people. And so I try to focus on what I can do day by day, and I try to get people to understand that, rescheduling, as important as it is just one step.
Right.
And there's so much else to be done, and I just don't, I want to be a more hopeful person, but I don't have as much confidence that the rescheduling is going to benefit consumers as much as I would hope it would. Because my hope is it would be rescheduled, and it would be the drug would be more readily available to people. People would be able to have increased access to it. And that's not the conversation I'm seeing around a lot of this. I'm seeing how is it going to affect the businesses, which is important, and improving the business's ability to operate efficiently will increase access to cannabis in a way. But that's kind of that trickle down sort of thing that I'm not interested in. Mm-hmm. And so I want to see politicians talking about what's going to be done to improve the lives of consumers. Is it increasing the testing quality in different states? Is it increasing access? Is it making sure that people aren't being harassed by their banks or by their mortgage companies or whatever it may be? Like, what are we doing to actually affect the bottom line? Or is this more kind of lip service it's gonna be, I always picture the kind of break glass in case of emergency. That's where cannabis legalization is. It's just going to be thrown out there when a politician needs it to be. Yeah. And so I really want people to get involved locally, because I think that makes a massive impact, because we're seeing a lot of opposition locally in different communities that are fighting. And so you'll find a lot of the time it'll be like one or two city councilmen that are anti-weed. Sure. And it really is a domino effect that can lead to states opting out of cannabis regulations, which is just insanity, that a few people who are kind of hard-headed and have these antiquated beliefs can have such an impact on the entire country. And so I would really encourage people to also be very cautious locally of what is going on, because a lot of the anti-cannabis regulations are really passing on a local level, and it's escalating from there. And I think that, if we're going to have to fight over the next however long until legalization and decriminalization, it's going to involve a lot of people, and it's going to involve more than just businesses, because as much as I'm here representing a business, businesses look out for other businesses. Right. And that's the nature of it. It is what it is. And we need a lot of cannabis advocates and consumers fighting for this, because it is a really miraculous plant. And we really have the ability to vastly improve the quality of life of so many people. And tying that up in bureaucracy and politics that's criminal to me. That's what should be criminal. Yeah, I love that. And I couldn't agree more. It is frustrating when you see those, city council people. There's one in Chicago who has in their ward just resisted all, she's getting rid of licenses to operate for businesses in her jurisdiction. And you can see that others are starting to kind of glom onto that. And there's a discouraging little bit of growth there on that side of the issue. At a time, you talked a little earlier about, your own experience medically and how miraculous this was for you. And I just want to briefly go back to that, because I've talked about that a lot on the show too. But specifically the idea of doctors trying to prescribe you and doing so Vicodin, other opioids, oxy, morphine drips, these things that are so extreme. And imagining somebody who is just in high school, as you talked about for yourself, just trying to figure out life and become an adult person, which is hard enough at that age, because you're being altered by your own body. We're all going through, you go through puberty, you got, your hormones are going crazy. It's a time which is difficult for all of us to get through. And then you throw onto it being altered by pharmaceuticals and strong substances, which are very addictive. Right. And when it stops working for you, the advice is to take more. The tolerance, the addiction, all that stuff, and what cannabis can free people from. You kind of talked about those states that are suffering from that too. I bring up states like Kentucky and West Virginia a lot too, because it's like they have above the average opioid addiction rates, right, and yet cannabis is illegal there. And their politicians are kind of hung up on it. Same thing. They won't, even medically, they won't allow for that. And yet you got people literally dying because they're overdosing or the withdrawal's too much. And it's just, it is criminal. And I guess what it makes me think of, though, is that the 2018 Farm Bill legalized hemp products effectively up to that 0.3% THC right, threshold. And that now is sort of become this battle around cannabis in general. It's kind of centered now on this cannabis versus hemp kind of thing. And you see states, California, which was surprising, but I know their governor was looking to ban it. Here in Illinois, there is now a fight between the governor and the mayor of Chicago, whether to ban outright, whether to regulate these products. Both houses of Congress looked into potentially banning hemp last year. It didn't go through, thankfully, and I say that because it's a murky issue, and I don't want to necessarily, I'm not trying to back you into a convoluted place here, but it's
it's tough because on the one hand, if cannabis isn't legal in a state like Kentucky or West Virginia or anywhere else where they can't get it, hemp can sort of be something that gives these people a real lifeline where they can't get what we can get in the cannabis space. However, when the hemp businesses are not subject to the same regulations, the same red tape, the same examinations and having to like pass tests and be licensed and all of that, I've said it on the show a lot. There are absolutely bad actors in that space because there just simply is not.
100%.
Yeah, there's just simply not the same oversight that there is with cannabis. And I don't know where this sits in Michigan right now, but I want to ask you, as somebody in the cannabis business space, how do you look at this hemp versus cannabis problem, and where do you think is best to kind of land on it?
So, I mean, I think it's a very, as you stated, it's a very complicated problem that has a lot of levels to it. We want hemp to be widely available. We want people to have access to it just as we want, increased access to cannabis. But we do need regulation. And as much as my entire job is regulation, my entire job is dealing with rules and changing policies and everything, and as exhausting and arduous as it is, it's so important because we want people to know what they're consuming. You should always know what's going into your body. And so we need regulation there, and at the same time, we need cooperation between the regulators and the licensed businesses that have been dealing with it, because there is so much knowledge there. And while it is kind of, I can use the word murky, it is absolutely murky, but so much of that is intentional. And so much of that is due to the refusal to allow research on cannabis, the refusal, and hemp, and like the refusal to allow, universities and pharmaceutical companies and so many people to do research. And as much as that's kind of a slippery slope because, how much do people want pharmaceutical companies involved in the cannabis industry? I have a lot of opinions on that. Yeah. But, it's until we open up cannabis for people to be able to research it and conduct experiments and do controlled studies and everything, we're not going to be able to efficiently and successfully regulate hemp and cannabis, and we're not going to be able to effectively cater to all of the consumers that depend on it, because cannabis, I think, can be helpful to so many people. And I think that the barriers to entry to the market are really, like I said, a lot are very intentional, but a lot can be fixed if we increase education and awareness around these things. Because our politicians and the people regulating this, a lot of the times don't have all the information. They're politicians, they're regulators, they come from different industries, and you don't expect these people to know all these things, which is why historically we've relied on experts from the industry. Mm-hmm. And there's this hesitancy to do that in cannabis. There's a hesitancy to rely on the experts or to even recognize that there are experts in this industry.
Right.
And so I think until politicians and regulators are more willing to work with the people that know what they're doing and what they're talking about, it's always going to be murky. We're not going to be able to successfully pass any useful joint hemp and cannabis things, in my opinion. But I think it's needed because I think they're both occupy very important parts of the market. But like you said, there's bad actors. Just like there are in any industry, there are. But the bad actors in the hemp industry can take advantage of the fact that there is so little education and there is so little research, and that the people they're dealing with don't always know what they're talking about. And so until we kind of get a handle on that, and until we can, recognize that there are experts in the cannabis industry that aren't just doctors who are anti-cannabis,
right.
Progress is going to be slow. And man, do I hate slow progress. I'm not a patient person.
Yeah, I feel that. I feel the same way. Patience is not a virtue I possess either. Narmin, I could talk with you about this all day. I do want to, we did touch a little bit on that issue of pharmaceutical industry, for instance, getting into cannabis. And I talk a lot on the show about how, when I first started this a few years back, I thought that big alcohol, big tobacco, big pharma were fighting very hard. And I do believe that they did for years to keep cannabis at bay, to keep the status quo and the prohibition unchanged. Now it seems to me more like those big industries are likely going to try and get in on this through partnerships, through acquisitions, however they can, rather than trying to stem the tide. You know, it's that you can't beat them, join them kind of thing. But, you know, you mentioned, and obviously somebody who's experienced what you've experienced, you must have strong opinions about the idea of big pharma getting into cannabis. And I want to ask you, that alcohol, tobacco, what do you think in terms of, you know, not that people necessarily have a way of combating that, but what should people be doing as that starts to happen, and is that a good or bad thing?
You know, is it a good or bad thing is a hard question, because I think it'll have a lot of good. I think it'll help normalize cannabis. I think it'll help get it into the mainstream. It might lead to it being more accessible. Maybe pharmaceutical companies are creating it. It could be covered by health insurance. It could open a lot of doors in that regard. My fear is that, you know, the pharmaceutical industry is the pharmaceutical industry. I think that they'll try to knock out all the mom and pop shops, just like we kind of see with a lot of MSOs tend to do when they come into a state, things like that. So any billion-dollar company is going to try to kill all the little guys and take the market share and do that. So totally a concern. I also worry about people being priced out of their medicine, really. The same way people are priced out of their medicine now. And we work really hard at Exclusive to make sure that we have products at every price point so that people can have access to things, no matter how much money they make. But I don't think the pharmaceutical industry is going to care. They certainly don't care when people are dying without their insulin. I don't think they're going to care if people don't have access to their cannabis. And so, as much as I think it will help lessen the stigma, and a lot of good will come from it, kind of, I think it'll be a troubling time. And I just encourage people, as always, to educate themselves, because A, everything you read on the internet's not real. B,
spoiler alert.
Yeah. B, you know, a lot of the information that's put out by these companies, or that's like a lot of the research is funded by these companies, and that's why those results are so murky, is like, where's this information coming from? And so, like, I grew up in a big, you know, question everything kind of household, and it was kind of even in high school, you know, they teach you classes on propaganda and computer literacy and how to tell the difference between a fake article and a real article, and what a scholarly source is, and you can't use Wikipedia, and all that jazz that was drilled into our brains.
Right.
And I just think that, I think all of the bad actors, whether it be the pharmaceutical industry, whether it be the politicians that don't have our backs, you know, all of those people that I would kind of consider bad actors, I think they thrive off of the lack of education and the lack of awareness, and they thrive off of the stigma, because that means they can control the narrative when they want to. And so I just encourage people to, you know, diversify where you get your news. Make sure you're listening to all these different things, and do your own research, and talk to operators, and reach out to the cannabis companies you like, and ask questions about the brands that you buy from, and all of these things, because, you know, one day it will be legalized, because it will be financially beneficial to someone that it's legalized. And when that day comes, I hope that there's still a lot of these legacy companies, a lot of legacy brands like Exclusive, that have really worked hard to make the cannabis community one that fits a lot of different people and that serves its consumers. And that's what I hope continues to happen.
Yeah, that's a very important message, and well said. And speaking of, you know, companies that people can reach out to, brands that they should explore more, if people are looking to buy one of Exclusive products, or maybe get involved with the work you guys are doing, how is it best for them to do that?
Yeah, I mean, you can reach out to us. We're on Instagram. We have our website with our contact page, exclusivebrands.com. And, you know, we sell our products in Michigan, but we also have Nino's Naturals. Our CBD line is sold nationwide on our website, ninosnaturalscbd.com. And people can reach out to me. I'm around. I'm on LinkedIn. My email's out there, and I really like to, you know, hear from people, and I like feedback on our company, on our brands, on everything, because I take very seriously that we serve our community, that we serve our consumers, and that we're increasing access to cannabis, because I think that It's really life-changing. It changed my life, and I know it can change so many people's lives.
That's wonderful and a really important message. And yeah, making it easy to kind of reach out to exclusive brands and get involved, and gave you an idea there, listener, of some of the brands that they offer, even those Nino's Naturals that are outside of Michigan you can buy anywhere, which is just fantastic. Narmin Jarrous, Chief Development Officer at Exclusive Brands. Thank you so much for taking some time today, sharing your journey and perspective, and giving people something to look forward to and some, new cannabis products to try out.
Of course. Thanks for having me. It was so fun. I feel like we could have talked for hours. And
yes.
It was such a good time.
And there you have it, listener. I want to thank one more time my guest, Narmin Jarrous, who really had a fascinating story to tell. I hope you enjoyed that as much as I did. Just hearing from someone's own perspective, talking about the medical side of this. I mean, I've talked on the show about how I struggled my whole life with getting to sleep. But, getting to sleep, as important as sleep is, I'm not knocking that. It is very important. But 8 hours of sleep and sort of how that impacts your functionality in your day-to-day life is very different than chronic pain. Chronic pain and discomfort like that is at a level that sleeping or anything else really doesn't come close to. And as you heard Narmin talking about it, like being a high school student and experiencing that, and then you have these doctors looking to prescribe you some really heavy opiates, that adults get addicted to and all this stuff. That is sort of why cannabis is just such a great alternative. For Narmin to talk about how it's impacted her life that way, and for how much it's allowed her to live a normal life that, 10, 12 years ago she had no hope of doing and had no idea how to do because of her condition. So I think that her story is really inspiring. The work that she's doing at Exclusive Brands is really inspiring. And I want to briefly also touch on one of those other products that she talked about from her Nino's Naturals brand. This is the CBD and CBN gummies that we were talking about a little bit. You can order these wherever you are because they're CBD product and they are under that THC threshold that we talk about, which makes these accessible no matter where you live. So that's wonderful. Second of all, the CBN makes for a nice recovery element. As in fact, these products, these gummies, are called Revive CBN. 10 milligrams per piece, so per gummy. And I've been taking them along with my wife, Gretchen. We take them at night, sort of getting close to bedtime, because CBN is a nice sleep aid. They're not marketed that way. They don't say to take them at night. They do say take one gummy daily. Do not exceed the recommended dose. Do not use if outer safety seal is damaged or missing. Very responsible. Much appreciate that. And then the other typical cautions that you get, like keep out of reach of children. Then looking at the supplement facts here, you got 1 serving size per gummy, no fats, 10 calories, which you get from 1 gram of added sugar and 3 grams total of carbohydrates. But in my view, those carbs and those calories are totally worth it because these are some of the best gummies that I have had. And Gretchen feels the same way. We both will try edibles and stuff. And a lot of the gummies that I've talked about on this show that I experience in general are gelatin-based with a lot of sugar on them. That is not the case with these. Again, you're only talking about 1 gram of added sugar, which is huge, and only 3 grams of carbs in general. And I think that for gummies, that's pretty good. These are also pectin-based, not gelatin, which I also have talked about on the show before, and I say that makes a world of difference. Pectin is vastly superior for a gummy base than gelatin. So the texture is great, the taste is great, and the vibe of these Revive CBN gummies is stellar. The 10 milligrams come on nicely, subtly, it's not too strong, and if you take them in the evening like Gretchen and I do, it's just a nice it's a nice nightcap. where you're sitting there watching TV, take them about an hour before you want to go down to bed. You'll feel it settle in. You'll feel nice and just kind of lulled down warmly into a nice sleeping chamber, and then off you go. So if you're into the edibles, and, I just talked about earlier, I talked about those WYNK THC seltzers. I love the beverages, and there are a couple of other products from Nino's Naturals that I'll also tell you about in the future. But I wanted to start with the Nino's Naturals Revive CBN gummies. You can order these wherever. Head to that website that we talked about during the interview, and you can get these for yourself. But I approve these 100%. I think these are great for a nighttime consumption, and I think that if you give them a try, you will find that they help revive you just the way that the name suggests. Gretchen and I have certainly found that for ourselves. I'm still chugging this strawberry lemonade from the WYNK. This is really good stuff. But also good stuff is going through some news headlines. We're going to rifle through some topics that I thought were worth your attention. Let's start with some good news. This is from thehighway.co. A bill has been introduced to legalize recreational cannabis use in North Carolina. This article came out a few days ago, March 27th. And the main point of it is talking about a House Bill 413, officially titled the Marijuana Legalization and Reinvestment Act. The article calls it a landmark move and saying that the state has introduced House Bill 413, aiming to legalize recreational cannabis use for adults age 21 and up. This legalization seeks to regulate the sale, possession, and use of cannabis within the state, marking a significant shift in North Carolina's approach to cannabis policy. Then the article sort of goes through some of the key provisions of House Bill 413, the legalization, the age limits, possession and cultivation limits, which would be permitted. Adults would be permitted to possess 2 ounces of cannabis flower, 15 grams of concentrate, or 2,000 milligrams of THC in infused products. They also would allow individuals to cultivate up to 6 plants in their private residences, with no more than 3 being mature at any given time. Then they go through the regulatory framework in taxation, social equity, and community reinvestment, along with the restrictions and penalties. They also kind of go through some of the economics of it, along with the public opinion and political climate in North Carolina. Very good article. I've linked it below like I typically do from thehighway.co. You can check that out at your leisure. Heading over to the West Coast. This is a article from the SalemReporter.com, Oregon news, and they say that state, Oregon, has spent $46 million fighting black market cannabis, and the kicker is that officials cannot tell if it's working. This article is from Kaylee Tornay of Investigate Midwest, published today, April 2nd. Now, this article goes on for a while. Not going to read all of this one either, but I've linked it below. Feel free to follow along and check out the whole thing for yourself. But the article kind of sets the stage for the climate of cannabis in Oregon overall. They say that the tales of illicit cannabis operations were coming from all corners of the state by 2018, 4 years after the state voted to legalize recreational cannabis, and lawmakers were feeling the pressure to act. The author then basically outlines some of the unlicensed grows where they are in the state and how legislators responded to this concern, creating new grant program 7 years ago to support law enforcement efforts to bust illegal grow operations. $3 million initially from taxes of the sale of cannabis funding this. And over time, that swelled to, as the headline said, $46 million over the last 7 years. Millions of cannabis plants have been seized. Hundreds of workers have been helped out of danger. But has the money put a dent in the black market? The author asks. Officials, as they note, can't say. It is not possible to draw conclusions about whether the grant has reduced Oregon's illegal marijuana market at this time. The Commission's annual report on the grant program stated in 2024 and again this past January. Now, they note it's partially due to the clandestine nature of illegal markets. It's not as if these black market operators are filling out paperwork or, waving smoke signals toward law enforcement saying, hey, guess how our numbers were last year. It's not really how that goes. We all, I think, realize that. So the ambiguity is a little understandable there. But the author notes these are the agency's most frank admissions yet of how little is known about the scale of Oregon's illicit cannabis market. even though lawmakers are still allocating millions every year trying to crack it down. And the reason that I thought this was worth your attention is that I thought it illustrates one of the key problems here. As states and countries, like Canada, have struggled over the years to deal with these black markets. You vote to pass legalization in your state or province or country, wherever you are. Let's say the votes happen, and then finally, miraculously, cannabis is legalized recreationally there. Everybody celebrates. But the thing is, not everybody's going to those dispensaries. Some people still stick with their dealers. It's something that happens in every state. I talked about it last week with Vanessa Yichan of New York, of Alta Dispensary. We talked about how they're still dealing with the black market there. Some states, call it the gray market, where they don't know if it's definitively illicit or illegal or some kind of mix of the two. Either way, this is a continuing, pressing problem. Because as long as the black market exists, people don't have to buy legal. And I understand why, especially here in Illinois. I've heard from plenty of people who will either still buy illegally, will grow it themselves with or without permits, or they'll drive to places like Michigan in order to bulk up there and not, or I say bulk up, I mean buy in bulk. They'll go up there to load up at a much cheaper clip than they would be able to buy here in Illinois. So either way, that money is not coming into the state that it's meant to, that legalized this stuff. And Oregon is kind of an example of what I would say is like what you don't really want to do. They just admitted that $50 million from cannabis sales over the past 7 years has basically, they can't say whether or not it's done what it's supposed to have done. And my point is that your state or country doesn't want to be there. If you're going to take money from the cannabis sales and taxes and put it towards cracking down on the black market, which I think is a very valid intent to go do, you want to be able to measure it and sort of do more to make sure that your efforts are working more than Oregon has done. So that's all I'm going to read about that article. There's plenty more information there, though, and I'd love to hear your thoughts about it if you have any. Next is an article from greenstate.com. This headline is a quote from one of the people they interviewed. "You ain't medicine. Weed industry responds to damning pesticides reports." This was put out last week, March 26th, by Rachel Gordon of greenstate.com. I won't read the whole thing of this one, but I've linked it below. You can follow along or read it at your leisure. One of the main benefits of buying regulated cannabis is the assurance that products are tested. Most consumers trust that shopping at a licensed dispensary means their weed is clean and fit for consumption. However, reports of banned pesticides in legal pot products sent shockwaves through the California cannabis community, leading many to question if regulated really does mean safer. In response, some cannabis brands are taking steps to raise the bar and prove to customers that their products are legit. This is really the key that I wanted to bring this up to you for. The Environmental and Consumer Compliance Organization, ECCO. This is a California-based nonprofit education and certification program for cannabis products, quote, dedicated to safeguarding consumer health, educating consumers, and elevating industry standards. Founded in late 2024, so it's very new, the group offers voluntary independent third-party testing for 138 harmful contaminants, going far above and beyond the 21 pesticides the state of California requires testing for. Here's how it works. Cannabis companies enroll with ECCO, paying dues for compliance and marketing. Any products they want to be considered for certification are then tested. Moving forward, 2 random SKUs are selected at the retail level and sent through the rigorous testing panel, a process that's repeated monthly to ensure compliance. So, you sign up with ECCO, you pay your dues, then you submit any products you want certified and tested. Then every month, while you are a member of this group, while you're enrolled, every month they will test 2 random products you have on your shelves to make sure that you're still compliant. If they pass, this is back to the article, the brands are then eligible to add an ECCO certified logo to their packaging, demonstrating a commitment to higher testing standards. If there's a fail at any point, the certification is revoked and the brand cannot reapply for 12 months. The price of membership varies depending on revenue and product category, starting at around $700 per month. Now, the article goes on and says this week ECCO announced its first cohort of member brands and the findings of an audit that saw both member and non-member brands subject to the nonprofit's testing panel. The results for the non-member brands were alarming, to say the least. The article goes on, according to a release sent to Green State, at least one non-member brand tested positive for a pesticide banned by the California Department of Cannabis Control. Jennifer Lujan, executive director of ECCO, told Green State her organization notified the brand, retailer, and lab of the findings. That's all I'm going to read of this article. The main point, though, is that I really like this initiative. Now, this ECCO is a nonprofit. Hopefully it stays that way. Because an independent third-party nonprofit who is testing these products of members and non-members alike, I really like that. Because, this is like the Rotten Tomatoes that we have for movies, except it's a lot more important than that. This is, as this article notes, the state of California only has 21 pesticides it's concerned about, and so it'll test for those. But this independent group will test for a lot more than that, 138 contaminants. And so that logo, ECCO certified, that to me is going to start to become really important, because we have already seen, and certainly not just in California, I'm talking about a lot of legal states, Illinois included, there have been investigations into cannabis products that show mold, that show pesticides, that show things that are not meant to be there on these regulated products that are available on dispensary shelves, and yet they are. So the point is, when these states are concerned about a lower number of contaminants, and they've already been shown to not really be gatekeeping, as in they've not been doing a good enough job enforcing those standards so that some of those products that are contaminated with those are still ending up on store shelves. An independent watchdog like this, ECCO, I think that is going to be really important going forward for the future, because those badges, when you go through a dispensary and you know what that's about and you see that badge on the logo, that it's certified by them, you're going to be able to breathe a sigh of relief and know that what's on that nutrition label is what's going into your body. And I think, from where I sit, that is a standard that I think we should all expect in 2025, and it's going to be critical to moving cannabis normalization and destigmatization forward, because people should be able to know reasonably what it is they're putting in their bodies, and having some company like this certify that and tell people that that's accurate, I think that's really important. So I thought that was worth bringing to your attention as well. And two more quick ones here. I'm not going to go through much of these. Both of these articles are from marijuanamoment.net. You know my feelings if you've listened to the show on that publication. Really love the work they do if I don't love the name of their publication, but that's another issue. This article was published yesterday, April 1st, and I'm guessing this is not an April Fool's publication. Kyle Yeager is the author, and the headline is White House has, quote, no action planned on marijuana, but Trump quietly pushed lawmakers on cannabis banking. Even though there's no current action planned on cannabis reform, some proposals of which this article notes that President Trump backed on the campaign trail. But apparently, the president did attempt to get cannabis banking legislation included in a government funding bill late last year before he took office. Trump took many by surprise, according to Yeager, when, weeks ahead of Election Day, he voiced support for marijuana rescheduling, industry banking access, and a Florida legalization ballot initiative, which we know ultimately fell short. But he has not publicly spoken about the issue since taking office, January 20th. And a White House official told CNN in a report published Tuesday, yesterday, from when I'm recording this, that no action is being considered at this time as far as cannabis is concerned. Skipping down in the article a bit, notably CNN also reported that 3 sources familiar with negotiations said Trump and his transition team did seek to sway Congress to include a measure protecting banks that work with state legal cannabis businesses in a continuing resolution to keep the government funded past December. We also know now that that did not happen, but as we sit here, April 2nd of 2025, waiting to hear any movement on the rescheduling front, when that administrative hearing might pick back up, any information like this, it is definitely noteworthy that the president, who, as the article noted, did make some promises about cannabis reform on the campaign trail, this president really did try and get some safe banking passed. So for my money, there's no telling what this means going forward in terms of the Trump White House and what they're going to do if they're going to reschedule or decriminalize cannabis. But I certainly think, as I said, I think it's worth noting that he made an attempt to get some banking legislation passed already before he was in office. So take from that what you will. I personally am going to take that as a positive sign. I think this means that maybe we will actually see some positive movement on the cannabis reform front. And on that note, the final headline that I'm going to share with you here is also from Marijuana Moment. This was from the day earlier, March 31st, and this is Trump's new White House drug czar called medical marijuana a fantastic treatment for cancer patients. The article starts, President Donald Trump's choice to serve as the next White House drug czar has called medical marijuana a, quote, fantastic treatment option for seriously ill patients, and said she doesn't have a, quote, problem with legalization, even if she might not personally agree with the policy. Trump picked Sarah Carter, a journalist known for her coverage of drug cartels, to serve as director of the Office of National Drug Control Policy, ONDCP. The president said Carter has, quote, been on the front lines of this international fight for decades and will lead the charge to protect our nation. Given the role of ONDCP director in setting and carrying out the administrative agenda on drug policy issues, the fact that Carter has gone on the record enthusiastically endorsing medical cannabis will likely be welcome news for advocates amid the Senate confirmations of officials with a mixed bag of marijuana records. I've talked a little about that on the show. We'll get more in depth into that in the weeks ahead. An interesting note here, though, this is the last bit I'll read from this article. Under long-standing federal statute, the drug czar is prohibited from endorsing the legalization of Schedule I drugs in the Controlled Substances Act. This right now includes cannabis. And as Kyle notes further down in the article, Trump himself has previously expressed support for medical cannabis as well as rescheduling of marijuana under federal law. So that's all I'm going to read of this article. I've linked both of those Marijuana Moment articles below in the description notes, as I typically do. I'm a big fan of the work that they do, so I encourage you to subscribe and support that journalism because it's really great stuff, and it's certainly a great way to keep tabs on what's going on in the legal cannabis space. But for now,
I'm getting high on reefer.
Yes, Niles is right, I am, but that's not what I meant. Right now, after the news headlines, I like to try and turn up the positivity here a little bit. If you've got any kind of cannabis product with you, if you've got a joint, light it up. If you've got a beverage like this beautiful WYNK strawberry lemonade that I've been sipping on, crack it open. If you got a gummy or some kind of edible, get ready to bite in. And let's all elevate the vibes a little bit here at the end of the episode with this week's High Haiku, read by my friend Reg Kiefer. Take it away, Reg. Whoa. Truth slips, twists, and bends. April laughs, but no one knows what's a joke or real. Whoa. What is real? I'll tell you what's real. That was this week's High Haiku.
got something to do with your April Fool's rant earlier there, Don?
Yes, it does, Reg. That's exactly what I was thinking. I always try and tie the theme of the High Haiku into what we've discussed on the episode prior. So yes, Reg is right. That was themed on April Fool's, which, as I said, I feel is kind of an outdated holiday now. But let me know what you think. Let me know about what you think about that. Any of the products I mentioned. If you tried Nino's Naturals and these Revive CBN gummies. If you give the WYNK lemonades a try, the new 10 milligram drinks, let me know what you think about those and tell me your thoughts on April Fool's Day or any of the news articles I shared by scrolling down and clicking the Text Cannabis Man link in the show notes. I want to thank my friends. I'd like to thank my guest, Narmin Jarrous of Nino's Naturals and Exclusive Brands in Michigan. Great job. Thanks for the conversation and thank you for sending these over for me to try. Thanks to my wonderful friends over at WYNK, Warehouse Beverage Co. They're doing some great work, and like I said, give these lemonades a try. It was very kind of them to send these over and let me try them out ahead of their release. I always love doing that. I'll have plenty of other products to tell you about, along with news headlines, perspective, and critical context, along with another guest interview next week on the Cannabis Man podcast. Until then, enjoy some lovely cannabis, spend some time with those you love, and just in general, try and squeeze all the pleasure you can out of this life, because it's short and it does go by fast, so enjoy it while you can, and we'll talk next week. Bye-bye. Cannabis Man is 100% originally crafted by myself, Don Kleppen. Original theme music written and composed by Yusu Kim, aka Good Son.